Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast from Practical E-Commerce, hosted by entrepreneur Eric Bandholz.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another E-Commerce Conversations. I hope all is going well. On the other side of the Internet, on the other side of the table from me, here in Zion National Park, Chico.
Yes, sir. Good to be here.
Welcome.
Yeah, been sweaty all day.
Sweaty all day. We've been out in nature looking at these beautiful mountains, hanging out with some very intelligent, wise, and witty friends. Some former guests of the e-commerce show. We got like Will Roman, Mike Teku, Brendan. I forget his last name. Oh, well. But you, what do you do?
Yes, sir. Well, I'm a full-time professor, and then I spend, let's say, a quarter of my time addressing my friends' challenges in business.
Yeah.
I talk to them. Sometimes it's a life existential pull that they need to figure out. I spend also a large part of my day sitting in a chair reading.
Yeah.
I'm paid to do that.
Yeah, they just pay you to read, huh?
Yeah.
What kind of things do you read?
Well, sometimes I'm trying to fill a gap in knowledge. Right now I'm looking at placement capital. It's a unique way of helping folks who want to lend money in the private sector and find companies that can fit the investment thesis they have to move $1 into a bigger dollar. It's really for them accruing interest on principal. So credit issued out has either a fixed or adjustable rate. We all know banking and how leverage capital works and risk capital, but I don't always know the client profile, and that's what I'm trying to solve. So if I say go into a Bitcoin mining space, or if I'm trying to figure out a energy sector or a micro sector within an energy sector, I have to get a stack of books. There's a guy named Mark Yudof. He was the chancellor of the UT system 20 years ago, and then became the chancellor in the California system before Janet Napolitano replaced him. And he told me when I was a student at UT Austin to become bookish in everything that presses a question. And he put his hand pretty heavily on a stack of about 8 books. And he kept smacking it when he said it. And I hear the noise still in my mind. I hear him hitting these books. And so when I have a question like this, like, what is this sector about? What's the forced liquidation value of piping and electrical equipment or other? I just hear that hit.
Yeah. So you're my first professor I've had on the podcast. So I'm excited to kind of like veer into what colleges are like. I was in college 20 years ago. It's been a long time. I don't know how much has changed there, but it feels like from a business person's perspective, and maybe true or untrue, that college is not really necessary for business people. It's like you find a problem, Zuckerberg and Elon and who else? All these people dropped out of college and they've built these multi-billion-dollar companies. What does school look like now, or at least what does the school look like where you teach, and what kind of expectations should students have going into college?
So I'm a professor of marketing at Texas Christian University at the Neely School of Business, and there is a healthy tension from those who have dedicated themselves to scholarship. So this is formal peer-reviewed journals, and the articles that are published in there, often behind a firewall, where only the community willing to pay into those published pieces will read them, evaluate them, and build upon their knowledge base and upon what's considered the tree of knowledge, and extending theory and working toward implications and the discourse around that. There's a limited scope and community who get a hold of those journal articles. All professors are supposed to read them. I do to honor my colleagues. Their tension is that if we are too market applied in what we do, we could become a vocational school. And then the healthy tension part of it is where folks like me who are in the clinical space that dedicate my heart and energy to pedagogy, to teaching, take industry and bring them to my courses. My curricula is entirely designed around my friends' problems. Not that I'm so interested in their headspace or headaches of life and trauma, but more about the challenges in business, hindrances that they face. And I bring them to class to talk about it, to talk about the pain. And then the wins as well. Those who have had windfalls, I bring them in and I have them talk about it, and we look at them as cases. And then all of my students are assigned a real business, likely in the lower mid-market that's fledgling. And I have a approach where I start with theory and I work through the scholarly understanding to honor my colleagues and the academy altogether. And then I work into the use cases or the market studies, and then I go into strategy. And that's where, with those three layers, we begin to move toward a consultancy. And at the end of each of my classes, the students provide the companies to which they're assigned their marketing strategy and their solutions. We rank order which ones are the most effective or which ones are the most actionable, implementable, and defensible, which ones would grow a company.
When you say we rank, who is we?
Me and the companies. Yeah, I oversee
Okay.
all the grading, but I work with the companies to give them in-depth feedback. And we
Okay.
do this through
So are all
intervals.
the companies looking at all the proposals, or are they just considering their own proposal that they got and the value they got?
So I had this semester 200 students in a class called Marketing Management, and I broke the students up into teams of 4 and 5, and I had 4 clients per class. I had 2 sections, so each client got 5 teams just about, and I think some had 7.
Okay, so they had like 5 different options to choose from per
Yeah.
company.
But to answer your question more directly, academia right now has many issues and many challenges, and overall I agree if a student doesn't need to be a student. If a young person is a business person already and has the guidance and the coaching and the financial literacy, sees a gap or a pain point in the marketplace and knows how to execute, and has the self-efficacy and drive and fortitude to live on an island, essentially, psychologically, to build a business or to go contribute to a firm and grow its value, then I do think they should do it. College is camp. Let's really look at it the way it is. It's about nurturing a student's intellect and internal fortitude and perspective in capital markets. And if they can't grow and have generative thought in that way, if they can't socialize effectively to build lifelong relationships, they're not going to get tuition ROI. In many cases, students outside of business schools are really, really twisted. They get a lot of cultural noise. I think they lose focus on how they can contribute value to an organization or a firm. And in many cases, they're not hireable. And if they are hired, they're sometimes swallowed up by what they probably consider a lack of coddling and a lack of attendance to their emotional state, when really business may not consider that.
Yeah. I would be curious. I've got a lot of listeners who have children who may be approaching college or they're preparing for college. And, there is a bit of an expectation that parents finance the college experience for children. I kind of want to help parents understand when it's going to be a successful experience for their kids who might be showing interest in business. What kind of expectations do they need to set up for those kids? Like, hey, you go to college. It's not about, learning this. It's not about, the connections. What is it really about going to college in the current environment?
The current environment, if you're in the wrong institution, you're not going to figure out how to contribute value to a firm. You're going to figure out how to beat a drum loudly, virtue signal, and likely build a society in a constructive framework that doesn't exist. So it's this idealism that gets pushed forward and then becomes a modality of a student's behavior. They graduate and then they're likely not as hireable as the parents may have thought or wanted. If you're at a business school or at an institution where they're not so overlaid with cultural noise, the student will likely run from zeitgeist and focus on value. Value in the market, value in trade, and value in building specialty and insight. I also think that in many cases, what's vocationally offered at institutions today is becoming upended by AI generative tools and automation systems. And so the student has to learn how to learn. And if they're already signaling that they can do that, college may not be their solution. For the parents that are looking at their son or daughter and they see something in them that is social and enterprising and they think college fits, I would recommend they don't shop colleges like I see often students coming from all around the country to look at TCU to see if it makes them feel good or if it looks pretty or if they have a professor that they had a prior relationship with or other that's actually a small bearer on one's success beyond graduation. What works is likely the network from which you grew up or one that you can touch for the rest of your life. So it should, in my opinion, be in the state that you can likely reside in and do business in for the next 20 or 30 years or maybe beyond. And in the immediate, can you find the resources and the assets, and can you be in an environment that is not so litigious to take your IP if you're developing something unique at the institution, which can happen, and it has happened over and over.
Like some universities will say any student that creates a business or an idea owns it.
Unless they're in an incubator or an accelerator, but those programs are lethargic in many cases. They have sometimes dinosaurs teaching them. But if they're real executives in residences, or if they have folks who have been in entrepreneurship that have had exits, that have boots on the ground and are stewards of that program, because instead of being at Techstars or Y Combinator or something like that, they'd rather be at the academic environment where things give them more space. The institution's amenities are often great. For example, at a private boutique institution like TCU, we have a multi-$100 million building in which we operate. We can spin up programs relatively quickly. Our staff are competent. Everyone's friendly. It's part of our culture. And so if you are an entrepreneur that has done well and want to share back and give back and have a high level of altruism, the officing and the program built around you, the families that you'll deal with, the students that are going to be in front of you are likely going to be invested. And it's exciting, it's fun. There's a kind of high burn and high pressure that you'll find from hack reactors, for example, where everyone who gets a job then pays the firm, right? And until everyone's placed, then that hack reactor doesn't do well. And so everyone's pushed, everyone's driven toward these long nights, or maybe it's a high-focused environment. And sometimes an 18 or 19-year-old needs to meander. Yeah. They need to be weird.
What is a hack reactor? Is that?
That's when they teach coding often to, say, C-level coders. They make them B and A-level coders. And then
at a university, or it's its own institution?
They're typically, you'll find them in Silicon Valley or in New York. And it's kind of like an accelerator without building a business, but more toward a specialty skill.
Okay.
Upskilling, you'll find in any co-working space, they have their own version of classes where you can get into them. And then they'll certify you, and they have a pipeline where talent is fed right into companies. A lot of companies pay handsomely, and a percentage of that first year earnings goes to the hack reactor or whatever that upskilling firm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about being aware of universities stealing your IP, essentially.
Yeah.
How do you find that information? I can't imagine they would broadcast, come to XYZ University where your ideas are our ideas.
It's less common now, but if you're working with the university's assets, typically you can sign template language in the incubator at the institution that protects the builder. That's now more common. It's been great. I remember when my buddies Will Roman and Tom Series and a bunch of folks now that have done really well in business or are on their way, we began entrepreneurial endeavors at the institution and had to go off-site to ensure that we didn't deal with any litigious fallout or anything that may have hindered our proprietorship. And I think the state flagships, you'll run into more of those problems. You're going to run into any public institution likely has a slower development in protecting a builder. And in an incubator or accelerator space, that is a stated program and named program, which means it's endowed and it has a community, which often means third parties like accountants and lawyers and others are present. They most likely have already that template language protecting the student or protecting the builder.
The other thing you mentioned is, starting with universities that are located near or close to you or in the same state. What if you're in, a state that doesn't have that same kind of entrepreneurial spirit and you're really looking to drive that and that industry is just not there to support you when you come back from school? Where do you recommend? Is it still kind of the same thing? Find the closest thing and bring it back? Or is it more, like go out on your own and really dive down and check the box for these particular attributes of business schools?
There's a reason why so many entrepreneurs drop out of school and why that story is amplified. I think the ones that I've taught who have made it through all 4 years or 5 years, whatever it took them, they did so begrudgingly because they had an internal rendering that pushed them toward the marketplace, and they saw that they weren't getting enough value sometimes in the modality of academic life. So the way to do college, if you're not a builder, is to lean into the social life without having to do keg stands and get into the drinking culture and the fraternity or sorority culture. And I was in Greek life, but I was a legacy and I was in a heritage fraternity, and it was something that was deeper and meant something. And those relationships are meaningful still. And that's often what's going to give you the most yield or tuition ROI from a college standpoint outside of an upskilling or outside of a talent procurement place. So Universities typically have these legacy relationships. My institution has outstanding T20 or top 20 firms, and that would be Accenture, McKinsey, Deloitte, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Goldman, and on. I've seen Gartner lately and Forrester and Paycom and some really interesting firms that are around our halls. It's awesome. It's awesome to see our students get hired in. If you position well, and this is beyond a GPA, sometimes it's the recommendations of faculty who have those relationships bringing these firms to campus, that can be a really good advantage where you have the pipeline into a company, but then you're an employee. Yeah. And so you have to know and begin to condition yourself to be an employee or to function well in the management consulting framework or the iBanking framework. If you're at an institution where the professor has no onus or responsibility to care about that placement or the experience after their class, but rather they're focusing on this number, the GPA, which I find more arbitrary, then you're likely in trouble.
Yeah. It's funny, like this conversation brings back a lot of memories to my college years, and I certainly partaked in the keg stands and social culture, as you put it there. And my expectation going into college was just do what I am told and just, like take all the courses I need to take, graduate, and then life will be great. Like you're done, right? Like you kind of stop learning at that point. And it probably wasn't for a good, probably 10 years after college that I realized that I'm on my own journey. Like I'm fully in control of what happens in my life. It's not something for me to just follow instructions, because I feel like so much of my experience in public schools was just like, listen to authority, listen to the teacher, do what they tell you to do, and you'll do a good job. There wasn't this transition to, hey, you need to start thinking for yourself, and here's how you think for yourself.
I wish you had met Will Roman and me in college. We broke every rule we could find. He still breaks rules all the time. And I had a bunch of buddies that I lived with at commune, which is what I lived in college, which doesn't represent any of my, say, politics or values now, but in lifestyle was a phenomenal experience because we took every structural rule and we tested it, if not broke it. This was 100 people living in a shared house where trees grew through it. By design, the architecture was unique and felt like a treehouse. There were 100 people that did their own cooking and cleaning and maintenance work. We elected leaders within the house and often usurped them from office right away if they were incompetent or other, or maybe they had interests elsewhere. And we just functioned in beautiful chaos. And that taught me in college to find the rules that I think were most applicable and useful and helpful. Now, as a professor, I would say I'm more buttoned up and focused on helping people. And to do that, I'm an institutional animal. I work hard to ensure that folks around me feel secure, that I'm not going to test or break those rules because I've already done that. And I recognize there are sometimes a societal blowback or consequence that can come as a result of behaving that way. And like you, I was probably a little wild in college. And I think in my 20s altogether, my personality was different. I was focused on a kind of hedonistic ideal or the reward system approach, meaning if I did something, the return value should feel good or should have fun or should have some kind of lifestyle benefit. And now the framework's different. I often find through a course of pain and struggle that I yield a greater enlightenment or result or learning process. That's now what I teach, and it's from those hard lessons. I don't want students to waste a decade like I did in a business context, building companies that would also make people feel good rather than solving a pain point or offering real value by testing a customer base or engaging them and obsessing over the customer. Instead, I focused on some ideal that I had, some vision of the world that I wanted to exist without realizing there was an addressable market or not. College can dilute you to think that way. Following rules, I think, makes sense, and I wouldn't say discredit somebody or malign them for this. Today's generation in college, they've been tested more than any prior. And the notion of, did I get the right answer? Did I get the right answer is often the neurosis or the concern they bring to the class. And I often don't have a right answer. Everything I offer, at least I hope to offer, should have an interpretive lens or an interpretive outcome. I don't offer exams in my class. It's not something that leads people to a final learning objective. It's just not my approach because I don't think usually business offers that. There's tests in little things that you have to do all the things, so to speak. You have these responsibilities. But in most cases, you have 3 or 4 or 5 options. And you go through decision paralysis in some cases.
Yeah.
What software do I pick, or which vendor am I going to use, or what manufacturer is most ethical, or whatever it is that you're spinning through. Altogether, the rules, I think, have been a good guidance. To me now, I follow them, again, to assure colleagues, to be a good institutional partner. But for my students, I actually want to push them. I've had students who did not belong in my class. I tell them not to come back, but rather I gauge their grade on what they're doing and executing and offering value elsewhere. And then through the semester, my relationship, while untraditional and without them present in my class, is still a learning experience. And I can also issue media and readings to guide them on that path.
Yeah. I want to talk about, your students. You have classrooms filled with 200 students. If I'm a small business, or Will here's got a small business, we all have small businesses, making a hire for our company is crucial. A bad hire can represent like a fifth of our employees, and can represent a tremendous impact in our business. If we were to take a risk and hire a college grad, how do we make sure we're getting a college grad that is a high performer, that, doesn't just interview well or, checks all the boxes? Like, what do you see in your students that make them potentially great team members for small businesses? And what should we look out for as small businesses trying to hire college grads?
The first is you need to make sure the student or the young professional is not focused on entitlement, but rather focused on learning and focused on leaning into the work, feeling a little bit of the pain involved in the rhythm of business where all the challenges reside, and have an excitement and enthusiasm toward learning what those challenges are and how to address them. They need to be solutioning, right? If there's a kind of focus on one's self and condition, and there's an inward or navel-gazing mindset, and you hear or see too many indicators of the word feel or the word I, or get away from maybe the customer and get in mindsets that get away from the modalities of work itself, then you need to run from that young professional. The student in college who you want to put in your firm potentially, who you're interviewing, you should hopefully have known for a year or two already. Put them in your firm as interns. The signals of competence are beyond looking them in the eye, right? Understanding their emotional intelligence, how they handle pressure, how you can go into a deep Q&A with them, how you can run through scenario play or other, is often tested through a builder project or something that has a value deliverable that at its endpoint can be assessed. And in the debrief, you see how they handle criticism and growth.
Yeah, you talked about they should be familiar with the company through an internship. A lot of small businesses have never had interns before. What is the expectation for building an internship? How do you compensate them? What kind of tasks should they be working on? And how do you manage someone who's only going to be there for, a number of months? And
student majors often segment them into a specialty or into a mindset or an identity construct or something like that. But oftentimes, and it's, say, an 18 to 22-year-old, or maybe it's a graduate student, they are malleable. They have no bad habits because they've likely been in industry for a year or two at most. So they have this impressionability in a good way. Often the best thing to do is to begin with having them shadow somebody who is doing something really well. And if that person cannot explain why or what they're doing well, have the intern or the shadow, the person that you've just brought in, take notes on what they observe that they think is effective. And then in a quick debrief, the project manager or that hiring manager can affirm or maybe adjust and clarify some of the things that are a gray area. In the observation, you can also ask, what would you want to do to contribute to what's working here? Or is this something you would also want to get into? And then until you find a point of enthusiasm and an area of early clarity, you likely are going to have a misplacement. So you need to make sure there's alignment because there's so few things that they're trained for. And you need to make sure they're in a training modality. They have to be in a learning approach or a learning mindset. If you're just hiring somebody to, say, spin a wheel a little bit faster, a little bit harder, you probably don't want a college grad. They're too expensive. They're going to have too many forward thought career objectives that you may not be able to focus on and help elevate for them. The last piece about an internship program is you can find some funding from alumni bases that will subsidize lower mid-market or stage finance companies or, say, single proprietor e-commerce businesses. And they know that these students need high-value placements, and those firms typically don't have headwind of, say, big brand marketing at the institution or other. The competence typically comes from a professor's recommendation or a mentor's recommendation, and then, of course, the interview piece. I love bringing in entrepreneurs to my class. I like, firstly, the friends I tend to get closer to they're gunners. They're folks that they can shoulder more pain and have dealt with more challenges and have busted through more walls than most people. You can see it in their eyes. They're tough. They have a kind of moxie. In my own way, I'm that way. And I tried to not get on too many sport teams because I become very intense. It's a part of my personality I really enjoy. I have a dark energy that I can put to it, and I see that in the entrepreneurs too, the ones that I love to be around. When they're in front of my students, these pressures that the entrepreneurs put on themselves, they come out in Q&A. And I think a few students realize that that's their destiny. It's to win that battle, and it's what Mark Taylor talks about and Josh Schultz talk about, which is slaying the dragon. They're out there for family, in many cases, building something that most people do not have the toughness or the vision or the execution power to build. And sometimes it comes down to a small decision every hour, or handling a customer care issue that they wish someone in the Philippines could do more effectively, but they haven't yet found that solution or other. And it's tedium, and the tedium causes agitation. And then you have to switch modalities and go into a new framework of mailing or shipping or something. And I just love that full wheel touch point. And not everyone does. In many cases, you're hiring, say, a marketing major, and they just want to do operational marketing, or maybe help build an automation tech stack, and that's all they want to do. But if you think about the person who lights up when an entrepreneur comes to a class of 200 students, which is typically what my classes are, at least this fall it'll be that way, there's inevitably going to be a high competent, high driven, tough young individual in there that wants to follow your path. There's a risk in this.
Yeah.
You mentor them, you train them, they will leave. So you have to make sure that you know that's coming, and you help time and pace them so that they offer value to your firm, but also you help elevate their path.
Yeah. I want to dig into a little bit more. You've established a lot of relationships with entrepreneurs. How much of that is you going out and seeking these companies, and how much of it is companies coming to you to establish that relationship? And then it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah.
If I am a business that wants to tap into their local college, who do they reach out to? How do they contact them? What are kind of like the best tactics for building that relationship with professors?
Every institution has a career services who will, if I say the things that I feel sometimes they won't necessarily hit, but I'll explain it like this. Small private institution, well-funded like TCU, our career services are great. They're going to help you. They're named after a legacy business, so they're often funded. They have sufficient staff. They're competent. They can help position students and reach out to alumni and begin to engage industry early. So when they show up upon graduation, they pretty much get it. There's still challenges with every generation. You're dealing with some other, broader issues or other, but in most cases, you're going to have a home run. And you can post your positions at the career services site, and they have Handshake or some other facilitator that brings the two parties together. So that's your hiring manager and the young professional. The big state schools and maybe some of the middling state schools, they're not going to often have the most competent staff. It's unfortunate. These will be folks that should have probably...
Like in the career services?
Yeah, they should have probably had software support, and they just didn't know how to get into the software support space, and so they're analog processing. It's not always this way. I've just seen it still happen. I think in 2023, it's inexcusable, and I'm not one to consult to other institutions unless invited into that framework, but I know there's a lot of growth area there. And so I've seen students avoid career services at those institutions, and businesses should as well, right, in kind. So it then comes down to a professor relationship where a company comes into the classroom and gets to pitch. But the relationships that I procure, every semester, there are going to be 8 new companies at minimum for my courses. And these are companies that are sourced from a group like the Astral Group or Ripen. These are education facilitation companies whose job solely is to go find, for me, lower mid-market and mid-market companies that have a marketing challenge that I can present for my students in the curricula where they're graded on their strategy at the end of the semester. They engage the course client throughout the semester. Now, as to my buddies, I make friends through friends, and there's a lot of social qualifying there. I don't necessarily have maybe a stated energy that folks would fear or avoid, but I have a pretty hard line of who I am willing to be friends with and who I'm not, mostly because of time, energy, bandwidth, and spiritual uplift, which means the discernment that I have is that I want high value, high intellectual folks that are driving towards something and building strength for them and their families or communities. In a business context, that typically means folks in e-commerce or folks that are in an executive rank. I often just simply say accredited, and for those who are aspiring and are pretty close to achieving that.
Yeah.
I want my friends connected to the students who are also that way, and I want my students connected to those folks. And so I think of it all as a network value. And if you don't have a touch point at a university that thinks that way, then they're going to give you probably something mediocre.
Yeah, I mean, like, as an entrepreneur, like, sometimes I just want to cut to the chase. So, like, who's the professor at, like, I'm in Austin, at UT, who teaches the courses that would develop students that are conducive to the Beard Brand way, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, I would think, like, some kind of teacher of entrepreneurship or some kind of marketing type of teacher. So I don't know, would it be going into someone who teaches, like, at a 400 level, or is it like a 101 level? Like, is there any difference in that if you're looking at a professor for someone who's a little bit further along with students? Or
the professor profile is going to help you. For one, my background is data analytics, data science. My PhD is in communication information sciences, which is essentially storytelling of data. And if the professor, one, hasn't upskilled themselves and evolved with the industry space of their discipline, then no matter how much talent they have in front of their students, the students they're not going to shift into your company's framework by the time you talk to them. But with Michael Teku, for example, he engaged our students at the sophomore level. And now we have a 2-year runway to facilitate an internship program potentially, or at least nurture these relationships so that by the time they graduate, he knows with a clear sight that they're going to fit their company culture, and for, say, momentum, they're going to do well. That's his business. And that means the student became part of that business early in mindset and in training. To meet professors, you have to hang where professors hang, and that's going to be a very boring space. Typically, we're reading most of the time, but I may be a little different. I like to show up at Disrupt conferences, or I like to go to software spaces. I like to be around builders. I like to touch these things too. I like to do them poorly. I'm right now working on my first e-commerce thing. I'm fumbling around. It's a disaster, but I love it.
welcome to the crowd.
Yeah,
You know?
I love it because it's a great learning experience. It gives me plenty of anecdote, but also I now know more acronyms and rhetoric, and also the manufacturing trials and supply chain issues and things that I conceptually enjoyed, but now I really understand in my own personal experience, and then I can readily understand beyond my experience for those who are doing that. If you have a professor who's not playing in the industry space, it's also a little tough to trust what they're going to do in nurturing student skill.
Yeah. How can people get in contact with you, reach out to you?
Yeah. So full name is Brandon Chicotsky, but no one can spell my last name. It's spelled Chico, like little boy in Spanish, then T, and then SKY, like sky above. And that's T like Tom, and then SKY like sky above. So Chicotsky is my handle on Twitter, and I'm not there much. LinkedIn's where I play most. And from there, just Googling my name, you'll probably find some silly things I did in my 20s, and then more recently, just me working in private equity. And I can always be reached on AngelList, too.
Yeah, I got to get you spending more time on Twitter. That's where all the e-com guys are.
That's what I see. I've been learning a lot about boring businesses and getting to that acquisition space, too. And Twitter's seemed to be real active there.
Sweet, man. Well, thanks for sharing your time on this beautiful evening here in Zion National Park. The stars have started to come out.
Yes, sir.
We've finally quieted down a little bit, so hopefully you guys heard it just fine. Thanks for sharing your time.
Thanks
this
for
has been
having me.
another e-commerce Conversations. Cheers, and keep on growing.